Amit Peled, it's so wonderful to have you here with us.
Thank you, thanks. Great to be here.
This is our first time collaborating, and I'm so excited about the Dvorak Concerto. For me, it's maybe the best string concerto that's ever been written.
Well, I always feel that it's actually a symphony with a cello, very important cello line, but it's really a symphony by Dvorak. So lucky you to be able to conduct such a piece, and I'm just enjoying the ride.
and lucky us to be able to play this repertoire in this time. We have a very large stage here, we are distanced, but we're able to do it, and I imagine you probably haven't done this concerto in a little while.
No, I haven't done it since the beginning of COVID, and I was just talking to people here on stage that this is the first time playing with a really big orchestra, something that we took for granted before. And now, during COVID, it was Zoom or maybe with piano. Last week I played with an orchestra, it was 12 players. That was really a big change, but now to play a piece the way it's written, it's amazing.
It's really refreshing, and the orchestra is just loving it and so excited to have you. And yeah, I agree, it's a symphony. He wrote this piece very late, right? It was after his 9th symphony. And do you think there's a reason he saved the Cello Concerto for the end? I mean, it's such an important work.
I don't know if there's a reason he saved it to the end, but I know that the story behind it. He was in New York, and he needed to hear a cellist, a real cellist, quote unquote, that can do stuff with a cello, and that was Victor Herbert. And he was his best friend in New York. They taught together, and Victor Herbert just said, "Hey, Anton, come to my concert. I'm premiering my 2nd cello concerto." And that's a true story. So he heard it, and he was blown away by what the cello can do. And then he went back and started writing it right away. So I think knowing the capabilities of the instrument made him decide to write it. And same thing happened, it was too late for Brahms, but when Brahms saw the score of it, he said, if I would know that this is possible, I would also write a cello concerto.
It's true. I mean, nothing had been written like that before. And I mean, I guess, you have the Haydn concerto, you have these different things, but the cello wasn't really considered the main, considered a solo instrument. Of course, Pablo Casals kind of helped that along, and you played his cello for a long time.
Yeah, I played his cello for 6 years, from 2012 to 18. And it was amazing. I mean, he played the Dvorak. There's a famous recording, 1937, on that cello. Of course, the Bach suites, and I recorded those pieces with this cello, and so it was an amazing journey for me to find my voice with it, but also simply to share it with the audience. Even today, now I'm playing on a Grancino, Pour Me, which is from 1695. And when the driver took me from Columbus, from the airport, he's a local from Lima, and he was very proud to tell me about his woodwork and how he loves working with wood. And I said, well, I have a piece of wood here behind me. He said, well, it's a cello, yeah? I said, yes, but it's 300 years old. He almost stopped the car. And then, we started talking about the value of those instruments, and he was just amazed by it. So that kind of sharing the legacy of those instruments is something I found maybe even more important than sharing the voice of those instruments, because for the majority of people, they just don't know.
I mean, I think of that movie Red Violin, when you think of the story of an instrument over the centuries. When you think of, America wasn't a country then, and to think of, the instrument, it's a living thing, it changes, and I have to imagine the style of the player changes physically the instrument, and so it evolves over time. Do you know the history of many of the people who have owned it?
The previous owner was French, and was a cellist at the Boston Symphony from 1918 until 1940, and then he was the first, or the main principal cellist of Detroit Symphony until 1955. Then he moved to Eastman, and he taught at Eastman, and generations of cellists have studied with him. And
it must be so nerve-wracking to have, at the same time, there's the story of Yo-Yo Ma leaving his cello on the subway.
Well, that's publicity.
It's such a responsibility, and yet an honor to have an instrument like that.
It is, but at the same time, it's insured. I was explaining to my driver today, it's very hard to steal them unless you want it to be in your basement just for you.
How do you sell it? It's like stealing a Picasso.
You can't sell it, exactly. So it's responsibility, because you are now the driver of something that somebody drove before and will drive later, after you. So you have to be responsible. But it's a working tool. We're craftsmen. And the beauty of it, that you're a craftsman, you have your working tool, and it's 300 years old, but it's meant to be played.
I always am sad when I see those Stradivarius instruments sitting in a museum.
Yeah.
They don't belong there, absolutely not.
No. I also have to say that being a soloist is something I love, because I get affected and infected by the conductor and the orchestra that I play with. You also the public usually. So it's always different and it's always refreshing. So I never get bored. I mean, how can people get bored with Dvorak?
No. Yeah. And I guess that's one of the benefits is, you and as an orchestra, we have 1 week and then the music is on to the next thing. You don't have the time to really digest over a long period of time. And I mean, do you even know how many times you've played this concerto?
No, I haven't counted.
So many, I imagine.
Many, but I have to say it's as difficult as in the beginning. It's as challenging in technically, musically. I go through the same process with this piece that I've always went through. And then, of course, there's a story behind it with Dvorak's sister-in-law that he was in love with. It's actually a tragic story, because he was in New York with his 6 or 7 kids and his wife. Then he gets a letter from Josephine, his sister-in-law back in Prague, that she's sick. And this is while he's writing the first movement. And when I was 16, I knew the story, but you don't really understand it until you experience life. So he decides to leave everything, to go to visit her, and to tell her that he loves her. Can you imagine? He didn't marry her because she was younger, but he did write to her 6 songs, the Josephine songs, and one of them is the main theme of the second movement. Da dee da 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 dee la da da da. That's the Josephine theme, and he's writing this passionately, thinking, okay, enough. I'm going back, and I'm telling her that I love her. She's sick now. And he's going back while he's writing the piece. He's writing the second movement with all the love in it and the passion. And by the time he gets there, because it's not like today, you have to take a boat, he gets there and she's dead. So he actually wrote a happy Hollywood ending like to this piece, but he teared it apart and wrote this tragic almost end. As a person, when you know the story when you're 16 or 20 or 25 or 30 or 40, it's very different. So again, it's never boring because we always look at it differently.
The pieces, they grow with you. And I love the ending because he takes the original theme from the first movement and he puts it in major, but then it's in minor suddenly. But then the very end, it seems triumphant, except he's doing a trill between major and minor. So you don't know if it's happy or sad. It's a little bit of a trick, a sort of a false hope. It's just such an amazing piece, and I can't wait to perform it with you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.